I thought I had lost the love of my life forever when she disappeared without a trace. One summer night in 1983, only to discover 40 years later that she had been living just 3 miles away from me this entire time, carrying a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about my own life. Well, hello there, my dear friends. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories. I'm your host, Frank Morrison, coming to you from my little corner of suburbia here in Toledo, Ohio. Before we dive into today's story, I need to share something that honestly breaks this old heart of mine. We've got over 200,000 people watching these videos every week, but only 8,000 of you beautiful souls have hit that subscribe button. That means 96% of you haven't subscribed yet. And folks, that just makes me sad. It really does. So if you're enjoying these stories from an old man's heart, would you please hit that subscribe button? It would mean the world to me. And while you're at it, give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. I read every single one, and they brighten my day more than you know. Now, today's story is perhaps the most personal one I've ever shared with you. It's about love, loss, and the kind of twist that life throws at you when you least expect it. This happened to me, and I swear on my late wife Margaret's memory that every word is true. Picture this, the summer of 1982. I was 25 years old, fresh out of college, working my first real job at Henderson Manufacturing here in Toledo. I thought I had life figured out, you know? I had a steady paycheck, a little apartment on Bancroft Street, and dreams bigger than the state of Ohio itself. But what I didn't have was love. Real love. The kind that makes you feel like you're flying and drowning all at the same time. That all changed on a Tuesday evening in June when I walked into Murphy's Diner on Monroe Street for my usual meatloaf dinner. I was sitting at the counter, reading the sports section and minding my own business, when I heard this voice behind me. Soft, musical, with just a hint of laughter in it, even when she was just ordering coffee. I turned around, and there she was. The most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my 25 years on this earth. Auburn hair that caught the diner's fluorescent lights and turned them into something magical. Green eyes that seemed to see right through to your soul. And when she smiled, which she did when she caught me staring like some lovesick fool, it was like the sun coming up after the longest night of winter. Her name was Diane Patterson, and she had just moved to Toledo from somewhere down south. Georgia, she said, though she was vague about the details. She was working as a secretary at the law firm downtown, Brennan and Associates. 23 years old, with dreams of becoming a writer someday. We got to talking, and before I knew it, 3 hours had passed, and Murphy was giving us the stink eye because they wanted to close up. I walked her to her car that night, an old blue Chevy Nova that had seen better days, and I asked her if she'd like to have dinner with me the next evening. She said yes, and I swear to you, my friends, I felt like I could conquer the world. Our first real date was at Giovanni's Italian restaurant on Summit Street. Nothing fancy, but it had candlelight and checkered tablecloths, and it felt like the most romantic place on earth. Diane wore a yellow sundress that made her look like sunshine itself, and we talked until they started stacking chairs around us. She told me about growing up in a small town outside Atlanta, about her dreams of writing the great American novel, about how she'd always felt like she was meant for something bigger than what life had offered her so far. I told her about my family, about my job at the manufacturing plant, about my own dreams of maybe starting my own business someday. But even on that first date, I sensed something mysterious about Diane. She was careful with her words when talking about her past, and sometimes I'd catch her looking over her shoulder like she was expecting someone to walk through that restaurant door. When I asked about her family, she changed the subject. When I mentioned wanting to meet her friends, she'd say she was still getting settled and hadn't really made any close connections yet. I should have paid more attention to those warning signs, but I was head over heels in love. Have you ever been so in love that your brain just shuts off all common sense? That was me with Diane Patterson. We spent the entire summer together, and it was magical. We'd drive out to Maumee Bay and watch the sunset over Lake Erie. We'd go to the drive-in theater and barely pay attention to the movies because we were too busy talking and laughing. She'd come over to my apartment and cook dinner while I told her about my day at the plant, and she'd read me passages from the novel she was working on. That novel was something special, let me tell you. It was about a woman running from her past, trying to build a new life in a place where nobody knew her secrets. The writing was beautiful, poetic, and I used to joke that she'd be famous someday, and I'd be able to say I knew her when. By August, I was ready to ask her to marry me. I had it all planned out. I'd saved up enough money to buy a little diamond ring from Goldstein's jewelry downtown. Nothing too fancy, but something that showed how serious I was about our future together. I was going to take her back to that spot by Maumee Bay, where we'd shared our first kiss, and ask her to be my wife. But Diane was acting strange that last week of August. Nervous, jumpy, like she was waiting for bad news. She'd get phone calls at odd hours and step outside to answer them, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked her about it, she'd just smile and say it was her sister calling from Georgia, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Then came the night of August 28th, 1982, a date that's burned into my memory like a brand. We had dinner at her little apartment on Oak Street, and she seemed more relaxed than she'd been all week. We talked about taking a trip to Niagara Falls the following weekend, maybe staying at one of those honeymoon hotels. She laughed at that suggestion, but there was something sad in her eyes. After dinner, we sat on her couch listening to records and making plans. She put her head on my shoulder, and I remember thinking that this was it. This was the moment I should ask her to marry me. I had the ring in my jacket pocket, and my heart was beating so hard I was sure she could hear it. But before I could work up the courage, she pulled away and looked at me with those beautiful green eyes filled with tears. "Frank," she said, and her voice was shaking, "I need to tell you something." I thought she was going to say she loved me. I thought maybe she'd figured out I was planning to propose. Instead, she took my hands in hers and said the words that would haunt me for the next 40 years. "I have to leave Toledo, tonight, and I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you where I'm going." I didn't understand. I thought she was joking at first, but the tears in her eyes were real, and her hands were trembling. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Leave? Why? Did I do something wrong?" She shook her head, and now she was crying in earnest. "You didn't do anything wrong. You've been perfect. These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. But I have to go, and it's better for both of us if you just forget about me." Forget about her? How could I forget about the woman I was planning to marry? I begged her to explain. I told her I loved her, that whatever was wrong, we could work through it together. I even pulled out the engagement ring, desperate to show her how serious I was about our future. When she saw that ring, she broke down completely. She kissed me through her tears and whispered, "I love you too, Frank Morrison, more than you'll ever know. But love isn't always enough." She made me promise not to follow her, not to try to find her, not to contact the police. She said it would only make things worse for both of us. Then she walked into her bedroom, and I heard her throwing things into a suitcase. I sat on that couch feeling like my world was ending, and maybe it was. When she came back out with her bags, she kissed me one more time and said, "Someday when it's safe, I'll try to explain everything. But for now, please just remember that every moment we shared was real, and I'll carry them with me wherever I go." And then she was gone, just like that. I sat in that empty apartment until sunrise, hoping she'd change her mind and come back. But she never did. I went to her workplace the next day, but they told me she'd called in that morning and quit, effective immediately. Her landlord said she'd paid her rent through the end of the month, but left no forwarding address. It was like Diane Patterson had vanished into thin air. I spent months trying to find her. I called every Patterson in Georgia I could find. I drove to Atlanta and spent a week showing her picture around, but nobody recognized her. I hired a private investigator with money I didn't really have, but he came up empty too. It was like she'd never existed. The worst part wasn't the mystery of where she'd gone or why she'd left. The worst part was the silence. No letter, no phone call, no word at all. I kept hoping that someday I'd get a postcard or a phone call explaining everything, but the years passed and nothing came. I tried to move on with my life. I threw myself into my work, got promoted, eventually started my own business like I'd always dreamed. I dated other women, and in 1987 I met Margaret, a wonderful woman who deserved better than a man still carrying a torch for someone else. But Margaret was patient and kind, and eventually I learned to love her in a different way. We got married in 1989, had 2 beautiful children, and built a good life together. But I never forgot about Diane. How could I? She was my first real love, and the way she disappeared left a hole in my heart that never quite healed. Even after 35 years of marriage to Margaret, even after raising kids and building a successful business and living what most people would call a full and happy life, there was always a part of me that wondered what happened to that beautiful woman with the auburn hair and the secret smile. Margaret passed away 3 years ago, God rest her soul, and after the funeral, after the kids went back to their own lives, I found myself thinking about Diane more and more. Not in a way that dishonored Margaret's memory, but like an old wound that aches when it rains. Last month I was at the grocery store, Kroger on Reynolds Road, doing my weekly shopping. Just picking up the usual bachelor groceries, you know. TV dinners, coffee, bread, the basics. I was in the cereal aisle, debating between cornflakes and bran flakes like it was the most important decision in the world, when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me, do you know if they carry that organic granola here?" Something about that voice made my blood freeze. I knew that voice. Even after 40 years, even though it was older now, I knew it like my own heartbeat. I turned around slowly, afraid that my old mind was playing tricks on me. And there she was. Diane. Her hair was silver now instead of auburn, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of 40 years of life and worry and joy and sorrow. But those eyes were the same green that had haunted my dreams for 4 decades, and when she saw me, when recognition dawned on her face, she dropped the box of tea she'd been holding. "Frank," she whispered, and hearing her say my name again nearly brought me to my knees. We stood there in that grocery store aisle staring at each other like ghosts, and I swear the whole world went quiet around us. Other shoppers were pushing their carts past us. The store's muzak was playing some instrumental version of a song I didn't recognize, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding. "Diane," I managed to say, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "My God, Diane, is it really you?" She nodded, tears already forming in those beautiful eyes. "It's me, Frank. It's really me." I didn't know what to say. 40 years of questions came flooding back, but all I could do was stand there and drink in the sight of her. She was older, of course, but still beautiful in that way that takes your breath away. "You look good," she said finally, and there was a tremor in her voice. "A little grayer, but good." "So do you," I said. "You look wonderful." We might have stood there forever, two old people lost in time, if a stock boy hadn't come down the aisle with a cart full of boxes and cleared his throat to get past us. "Would you like to get some coffee?" Diane asked. "I think we have a lot to talk about." We ended up at the same Murphy's Diner where we'd first met, though it had changed hands twice since 1982 and was now called Eddie's Place. We sat in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us, and tried to make sense of 40 years. "I never stopped thinking about you," I told her, and it was the truth. Not a day went by that I didn't wonder what happened to you, where you went, if you were safe and happy. She reached across the table and touched my hand, and it was like being struck by lightning. "I thought about you too, Frank, every single day." "Then why?" I asked, and all the hurt and confusion of those 4 decades came pouring out. "Why did you leave like that? Why didn't you ever contact me? I looked for you everywhere." Diane was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it held the answers to all of life's mysteries. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of pain. "I was married, Frank." Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. "Married?" She nodded, and now the tears were flowing freely. "I was married to a man named Richard Patterson. He was violent, controlling, dangerous. I tried to leave him twice before, and both times he found me and brought me back. The second time, he put me in the hospital. I felt sick. All those months we'd been together, she'd been running from an abusive husband. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you. We could have gone to the police." "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "Richard had connections, police, judges, lawyers. He always said if I ever tried to leave him again, he'd kill me and anyone who tried to help me. And I believed him, because I'd seen what he was capable of." The pieces were starting to fall into place. The mysterious phone calls, the way she'd look over her shoulder, the reluctance to talk about her past. "So when you came to Toledo," I began. "I was hiding," she finished. "I'd taken money from our joint account and run. I thought if I could disappear completely, start over somewhere he'd never think to look, maybe I could build a new life. And for a few months, it worked. I was happy, Frank, happier than I'd ever been in my life." "Then what happened? Why did you have to leave?" Diane wiped her eyes with a napkin. "He found me. I don't know how, but he tracked me down. That last week in August, I started getting phone calls. No one would speak, but I knew it was him. Then I saw him. He was parked across from my apartment, just watching. Waiting. I remembered that last night, how nervous and jumpy she'd been. The phone calls you said were from your sister. That was him. He called the night you came over for dinner and told me I had until morning to come home willingly. or he'd come get me himself. And he'd hurt anyone who tried to stop him. The weight of it all crashed over me. She hadn't left because she wanted to. She'd left to protect me. "So you went back to him," I said. I didn't have a choice. But I made him promise that if I came back, he'd never bother you. He agreed, but only if I never tried to contact you or see you again. And you stayed with him all these years? Diane shook her head. No, I stayed for 10 years, until our daughter graduated high school. Then I left again, for good this time. He was older by then, not as dangerous, and I'd been more careful about planning my escape. Daughter. The word came out like a croak. Her name is Susan. She's 39 now, married, with kids of her own. Diane paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Frank, she's your daughter. The world stopped spinning. Everything went silent except for the roar of blood in my ears. What? I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I left Toledo. I never told Richard. I let him think she was his, and he never questioned it because the timing worked out. But Susan is yours, Frank. She has your eyes, your smile, your stubborn streak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. For 40 years, I'd had a daughter and never known it. A daughter who thought another man was her father. Where is she now? I managed to ask. She lives here in Toledo, Diane said. She moved back about 5 years ago with her husband. He got a job at the university. They live on Bancroft Street, actually. Just a few blocks from where your old apartment used to be. 3 miles away. My daughter had been living 3 miles away from me, and I'd never known. Does she know? I asked. About me? No, I never told her the truth about her father. But Frank, she's so much like you. She's an engineer, works for the city planning department. She loves old movies and baseball and tells terrible jokes just like you used to. I was crying now, and I didn't care who saw. 40 years of missed birthdays, missed Christmas mornings, missed bedtime stories. 40 years of a daughter I'd never held, never taught to ride a bike, never walked down the aisle. I want to meet her, I said. Diane nodded. I hoped you'd say that. But we have to be careful about how we do this. She's never questioned her parentage, and finding out the truth might be a shock. We sat there in that diner for 4 hours, making plans, catching up on 4 decades of life. Diane told me about the years she'd spent hiding from Richard, about how she'd finally found the courage to leave him for good, about the fear and loneliness and regret that had shaped her life since that night in August 1982. I told her about Margaret, about the business I'd built, about the life I'd constructed on the foundation of losing her. It felt strange, talking about my marriage to another woman while sitting across from my first love. But Diane listened without jealousy or resentment. I'm glad you found happiness, she said when I finished. I worried about that, you know. I worried that I'd ruined your chances at love. You didn't ruin anything, I told her. Margaret was a wonderful woman, and I loved her truly. But you were my first love, Diane, and that never leaves you. We arranged to meet again the following week. Diane wanted time to think about how to approach Susan, how to tell her the truth without destroying the relationship they'd built over the years. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. In the space of one afternoon, my entire understanding of my life had changed. I had a daughter, a beautiful, successful daughter who was practically a stranger to me. The next week, Diane called and asked me to meet her at Riverside Park. She decided it was time to tell Susan the truth, and she wanted to do it together. Susan came to the park with her 2 children, thinking she was just meeting her mother for a regular Sunday afternoon visit. She was beautiful, my friends, with dark hair and eyes that were definitely mine. And when she laughed at something her kids were doing, I heard echoes of my own laughter. Diane had told her there was someone she wanted her to meet, someone important from her past. When Susan saw me sitting on the bench next to her mother, she was polite but puzzled. "Susan," Diane said, taking her daughter's hand, "this is Frank Morrison. He's your biological father." I'll never forget the look on Susan's face. Confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of dawning recognition as she studied my features and saw herself reflected there. "I don't understand," she said, looking back and forth between us. "Dad is my father, Richard Patterson." Diane gently explained the situation, about the abusive marriage, about the affair, about the decision to let Richard believe he was Susan's father. Susan listened in stunned silence, and I could see her processing this information, trying to reconcile it with everything she'd believed about her life. When Diane finished, Susan turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Is this true?" All I could do was nod. "I didn't know," I said, my voice breaking. "I swear to you, if I'd known you existed, nothing would have kept me away." Susan was quiet for a long time, watching her kids play on the swings while she absorbed this life-changing news. Finally, she looked at me again. "What's your middle name?" she asked. "James," I said. "My middle name is Jamie," she said softly. "Mom always told me it was after my grandmother, but there was never a grandmother named Jamie," Diane admitted. Susan started crying then, and before I knew what was happening, she was hugging me. This daughter I'd never known, this woman who carried my genes and my stubborn streak in my laugh, was holding me like she'd been waiting her whole life to do it. "I always felt like something was missing," she whispered, "like there was a hole in my life that I couldn't explain." That was 6 months ago, and since then, Susan and I have been working on building the relationship we should have had all along. It's not easy, trying to compress 40 years of father-daughter relationship into weekly coffee dates and phone calls, but we're making progress. She's introduced me to my grandchildren, and they call me Grandpa Frank now. Last month, Susan asked me to walk her daughter to her first day of school, and I swear to you, my friends, it was one of the proudest moments of my life. Diane and I have been spending time together too, carefully rebuilding what we once had. We're different people now, shaped by 40 years of separate experiences, but the connection is still there. The love is still there, changed, but not diminished by time. We're taking it slow, figuring out how to fit into each other's lives after all these years. Sometimes it feels surreal, like we're characters in one of those romance novels where the couple finds each other again after decades apart. Last week, Diane and I went back to Maumee Bay, to the spot where I'd planned to propose all those years ago. We sat on the rocks watching the sunset, and I pulled out that same engagement ring I'd bought in 1982. I'd kept it all these years, stored in a jewelry box with Margaret's wedding ring and my father's watch. "I know we're not the same people we were 40 years ago," I told her. "And I know we can't get back those lost years, but I still love you, Diane. I never stopped loving you." She took the ring, examined it in the fading light, and smiled. "It's beautiful, Frank. It was beautiful then, and it's beautiful now. Will you marry me?" I asked, the same question I'd wanted to ask in 1982. "Yes," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger where it belonged. "Yes, I'll marry you." "We're planning a simple ceremony for next month. Susan is going to give Diane away, and my son Michael, Margaret's boy who I raised as my own, is going to be my best man. It's going to be small, just family and close friends, but it's going to be perfect. People ask me if I'm angry about the lost years, about the daughter I never knew, about the life Diane and I could have had together. And the truth is, I was angry for a while. Angry at Richard Patterson for being a monster, angry at circumstances that kept us apart, angry at the unfairness of it all. But anger is a luxury I can't afford at my age. I'm 67 years old, and I've learned that life is too short to waste on bitterness. I can't change the past, but I can make the most of whatever time I have left. Diane and I, we're both survivors. We both built lives out of the ashes of what might have been. We both loved other people and raised children and found meaning and purpose despite the hole that losing each other left in our hearts. Now we have a second chance, and not everyone gets that. We have a daughter who's bridging the gap between our separate lives, grandchildren who are going to grow up knowing both their grandfathers, and time to create new memories to balance out the old regrets. The other night, Diane was at my house helping me sort through old photo albums, and she found a picture of me from 1983, about 6 months after she'd left. I looked terrible in that photo, hollow-eyed and heartbroken, like a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "I'm so sorry," she said, touching the photo gently. "I'm so sorry I put you through that." "Don't be sorry," I told her. "Everything that happened led us to this moment, led us back to each other. And that's the truth, my friends. Sometimes life takes you on detours that seem cruel and senseless, but maybe those detours are necessary. Maybe they teach you things you needed to learn, make you stronger, prepare you for what's coming next. I think about all the things that had to happen for Diane and me to find each other again. Margaret had to pass away, God rest her soul, freeing me to love again. Richard Patterson had to die, finally releasing Diane from his shadow. Susan had to move back to Toledo, bringing her mother with her. I had to be shopping for cereal on that particular Tuesday morning, and Diane had to be in the mood for organic granola. Any one of those things doesn't happen, and we never find each other again. It makes you think about fate, about whether there's some grand design to all the chaos and heartbreak and joy that makes up a human life. I don't know if I believe in destiny, but I believe in love. I believe that real love, the kind that changes your DNA and rewrites your dreams and makes you understand what all those songs and poems and movies are really about, that kind of love never really dies. It just waits, sometimes for decades, for the right moment to bloom again. So that's my story, friends. That's why an old man sits in front of a camera every week, sharing the most intimate details of his life with strangers on the internet. Because life is full of stories, and the best stories are the ones that remind us that it's never too late for a happy ending. Diane and I may be in the final chapters of our lives, but we're writing those chapters together, and that makes all the difference. Before I sign off, I want to ask you again to please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It really does mean the world to this old storyteller. And if this story touched your heart in any way, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Tell me about your own lost loves, your second chances, your belief in the power of time to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. Until next time, this is Frank Morrison reminding you that every ending is also a beginning, and love, real love, always finds a way. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.